When you're looking for a home in Florida, you'll see all kinds of descriptions like condo, villa, townhouse, single-family home, or an HOA community. And most people naturally think that those words describe what the property looks like. A condo is thought of as an apartment-style building, and a villa as a one-story, and a townhouse being 2 stories. And generally speaking, that's how we tend to use those words and see these properties. But here's where it gets confusing, because that's not necessarily what you're buying legally. A villa can actually be a condo, a townhouse can be a condo, and you can have 2 villas that look almost identical, where one is part of a homeowners association and the other is legally a condominium association. So if you're starting your home search, especially here in Florida where we have so many different types of communities, this is something you really want to understand, because HOA versus condo really isn't about what the property looks like. It's about homeownership, governance, and responsibility. Let's start with ownership. If you're buying a typical home within a HOA, you generally own the home and the land underneath it. The HOA does not own your house. But when you buy that house, you're also agreeing to the rules and restrictions of that particular community. So you may own your home, but the HOA will still have rules about what color you can paint it, what type of landscaping you can put in, and where you can park your vehicles, and what kind of fence you can put up. All those things depend on that particular HOA's rules and regulations. You also have rights as an owner. There's a board, there are meetings, budgets, elections, and owners generally have voting rights. And there are governing documents that spell out how that community operates. There's something else that I think buyers need to understand about this, and that's that those governing documents have real authority behind them. When you purchase in a HOA or a condominium association, you're agreeing to abide by that community's governing documents, and the association has legal rights and enforcement powers. Depending on the circumstances and Florida law, that can include notices of violations, fines, and other enforcement remedies. Your financial obligation to the association is real as well. If required assessments aren't paid, an association can potentially place a lien on the property, and under certain circumstances, they can pursue foreclosure. I'm not saying that to scare anyone away from association living, because millions of people choose it specifically because they like what an association provides. I just think it's important to understand that when you purchase in an association, you're entering into a legal relationship with that association. And that's why I always encourage buyers to actually read the rules and regulations and the governing documents before they purchase. You don't want to move in and then discover that something that's really important to you isn't allowed. With a condominium, the ownership structure is different as well. You're generally buying your individual unit, and that unit is legally defined in the condominium documents. And you also have an ownership interest in the common elements. Those common elements can be much more extensive than what you would typically see in a homeowners association. So like if it's a high rise, that's pretty easy to visualize. There's a lobby, elevators, hallways, the roof, the structure. You might have parking, garage, and a pool. And all those shared areas have to belong to somebody, and somebody has to maintain them. But remember, a condo doesn't have to be a high rise, and that's where people tend to get tripped up. You could be standing in front of the one-story villa with its own front door, driveway, and garage, and legally it could still be a condominium. There's also another practical difference that comes with pride of ownership structure, and that's control. So because more of the property is shared or controlled by the condominium association, you generally have less individual control over things like the building exterior and the common elements. So even though your condo may physically look and feel like an individual home, you may not have the same ability to make changes to the exterior that you would with a property that you own individually. Of course, an HOA can restrict what you do to the exterior of your home too. The difference is that in an HOA, you generally own that exterior and the land, but you've agreed to certain restrictions on what you can do with it. In a condo, some of those exterior areas may not be individually yours in the first place, and that's an important distinction. That's why I always say don't assume you know what you're buying based on just what it looks like. This is where the legal distinction starts affecting your everyday life, and one of the easiest examples is the roof. We care a lot about roofs here in Florida, and for good reason. You could have two villas that look almost identical, but in one community, the homeowner may be responsible for maintaining and replacing their own roof, while in the other community, the association may be responsible for it. That same idea can apply to much more than just the roof. You're going to want to know who paints the exterior, who maintains the landscaping, who's responsible for the driveway and the windows and doors and the exterior walls and the structural components, and any other part of the property that could fall either to the homeowner or to the association. You have to look at the governing documents and see who is actually responsible for what. This is also important when you're comparing association fees. You might see one property with a relatively low monthly HOA fee and another with a much higher fee and simply think, well, this one's obviously cheaper. Not necessarily, because the better question is, what does the fee include? If one association is taking responsibility for substantially more maintenance or services, you have to factor that into the comparison. So don't just look at the monthly number, look at what you're getting for that number and what you're still responsible for on your own. Another way I like to think about association fees is that a lot of what you're paying for are shared expenses. Let's take something simple like lawn care. If you live in a single family home and you hire somebody to mow your lawn, you're going to pay that person individually. In a community where landscaping is included, you're paying for lawn care. You're just paying your share through the association, and the association contracts that service out collectively. The same idea can apply to other things that the association provides or maintains depending on the community. Your dues may help pay for landscaping, common area maintenance, a pool, clubhouse, security, management of the building, maintenance, insurance, cable TV, so many other fees that simply isn't an extra bill that exists because there's association. It's going to be spelled out for you. It's important to understand what that money is actually being allocated for. That doesn't automatically make a higher fee good or a lower fee bad. It simply just means you're comparing two properties. You need to compare the total picture and not just the monthly number. That leads right into insurance, which is another big distinction, particularly in Florida. If you own a typical home in an HOA, you're generally responsible for insuring the home itself. Within a condominium, the association generally carries a master policy that covers certain portions of the condominium property. And then the individual owner carries their own policy for their portion of the responsibility. Their personal property, liability, and other appropriate coverage. Usually walls in. The important thing to understand is that you still need to know where the association's responsibility ends and yours begins. Everyone's written up different. It's all in the documents. Don't just assume because it's a condo association that it insures everything, because it doesn't work that way. You want to know what the association insures, what you need to insure, and if something happens, who's responsible for what. Again, the governing documents and the actual insurance coverage matter. Then there's lending. I'm not going to get too deeply into lending here because that's a whole conversation by itself, and I'm going to cover that later in another video in this series. But there's one difference I want you to understand. When you're financing a typical home in an HOA, the lender is primarily evaluating you and the property you're buying. With a condo, the association itself can become part of that lending equation. So you can be a perfectly qualified buyer and the condo project can still affect your financing options. That's becoming an increasingly important conversation here in Florida, and I'm going to dedicate a whole nother video to it because there have been significant changes in this area. For now, just remember that with a condo, you're not only buying the unit, the health and structure of the association matter too. After everything I've told you, you might be thinking, okay, so why would I want a condo? For the right person, condo living can be incredibly convenient. Maybe you don't want to worry about the exterior. You don't want to spend your weekends doing yard work. You don't want to deal with maintaining a pool, or maybe you travel a lot. You might be even a seasonal Florida resident and want to be able to close the door and leave for a month or two and come back and not have spent the entire time wondering what's happening with your landscaping. That's what we call lock it and leave it living. For some people, that's exactly what they want. You're potentially giving up some individual control in exchange for convenience and shared responsibility. Other buyers feel completely different. They want to own their own yard, they want more control over their home, and they don't mind being responsible for the roof or the exterior because they'd rather make those decisions on those changes themselves. Neither one's right or wrong. There's simply different ways of owning and living. Which one's right for you? That's really the question. Do you want convenience or more individual control? How much maintenance do you want personally? Do you want to own your own land? How important is it to be able to lock it and leave it? What does the association maintain and what are you responsible for? What does the association insure? What do you need to insure? What rules and regulations will you be agreeing to? And are there restrictions that would affect the way you want to use your home? What are your rights as an owner and what are the association's rights? What exactly are your dues paying for? And if you're financing, does the type of ownership affect your loan options? Those are the questions that actually help you decide. And there's one more option we haven't talked about, because you can certainly buy a property with no HOA and no condo association at all. They do exist here in Florida, and for somebody who really values independence and doesn't want associations telling them what they can and cannot do with their property, that could be very appealing. Of course, that also means there's no association taking care of any shared responsibilities. And if the lawn needs to be maintained, you're doing it. And if the roof needs to be replaced, that's on you too. So again, it really just comes down to control versus convenience. That's why I don't think the right question is simply, do I want a condo or a house? The better question is, how do I want to live and what do I want to be responsible for? So here in Florida, understanding that distinction before you start falling in love with properties can make your home search a whole lot easier. Once you know how you want to own, you can start narrowing down to where you want to live. And I'd love to help you with that. And thank you for watching. Reach out if you have any questions, share some comments below, and we'll catch you in the next video.